Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not just exploring an economist. We are really exploring the very architecture of how we understand the world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We're tackling a subject that is, frankly, massive.
Mm.
We are talking about an intellectual giant who just refused to stay in one lane.
Completely. He spanned economics, psychology, political philosophy, legal theory.
Even the biological sciences. We are talking about Friedrich August von Hayek.
It is a massive topic. You're absolutely right. Hayek is one of those figures who, he shapes the way we see the world, even if we don't realize it.
Right.
He is the man who argued that knowledge, and specifically the limitations of our knowledge, is the key to how society functions.
And he's the reason why people still get into these, really heated debates about prices, about liberty, and even about how the human brain works. So our mission today is to really understand the man behind these ideas. We want to move past the caricatures because, wow, he has been caricatured by both the left and the right and get to the core of his thinking.
Yeah, to get to the actual substance.
We've got a huge stack of sources here. Biographies, academic papers, his own writings, historical accounts. We're going to try and extract the most important nuggets for you.
And what I love about this particular deep dive is that Hayek isn't just an economist in a narrow sense. He's really a philosopher of ignorance in a way.
A philosopher of ignorance. I like that.
His whole career was basically built on this very humble idea that we know much, much less than we think we do.
Which is a very humble place to start for a guy who eventually won a Nobel Prize.
Right.
Speaking of which, that is actually the perfect place to start our story. The Hook, the 1974 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences.
It was a pivotal moment. It was maybe the defining moment of his later life, but it was also a very ironic one.
Extremely ironic. So picture this. It's 1974. Hayek has been, for all intents and purposes, in the intellectual wilderness for a while.
For decades, really.
He gets the call. He's won the Nobel Prize. But there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
He has to share it. And who does he share it with? Gunnar Myrdal.
Right. And for those who might not know the backstory, Myrdal was a Swedish economist, a brilliant man in his own right, but politically, economically, he was the anti-Hayek.
The complete and total opposite.
He was a socialist. He was the ideologue behind the Swedish welfare state. He represented almost everything Hayek had spent his entire career arguing against.
So Myrdal believed in the power of the state to engineer society.
And Hayek believed that such engineering was not only impossible, but incredibly dangerous.
It's like pairing a diehard carnivore with a vegan for a culinary award.
That's a great analogy.
Or like giving a joint award for best transportation to a bicycle manufacturer and an oil tanker captain. It just seems incredibly awkward.
Oh, it was. And Hayek knew it. He was actually quite surprised by the award. He explicitly suspected that the Nobel Committee paired him with Myrdal just to balance the political spectrum.
So they couldn't just give it to the free market guy, not in the 70s.
Especially not in the 1970s, when those ideas were so out of fashion. They had to give it to the socialists too, or vice versa. It was a political compromise.
And the best part for me is Hayek's reaction during his acceptance speech. Most people, if they win a Nobel Prize, would just say, "Thank you," cry a little, bask in the glory.
But not Hayek.
No. He basically warns everyone about the prize itself.
That is classic Hayek.
Yeah.
Just quintessential. He stood up there and warned about the danger that the authority of the prize gives to an economist.
He's worried about his own influence.
He felt that giving one person that much prestige would make politicians listen to them as if they were a god, even on topics where they had no expertise whatsoever. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that if he had been consulted on the creation of the prize, he would have advised against it.
That is incredible. Thanks for the medal and the money, but you probably shouldn't have given it to me, or to anyone else for that matter. That is a power move.
It really is. And it sets the stage for his entire worldview. Skepticism of authority. Skepticism of the idea that one person can know enough to fix everything.
He was warning against what he called the pretense of knowledge.
Exactly. The idea that just because you have a medal, you can run the world.
So let's rewind. To understand this deep-seated skepticism, we have to go back to where it all began. Section 1. The Crucible, we're going to Vienna.
Vienna in 1899, when Hayek was born. It was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was, a cultural and intellectual hub, maybe the most vibrant in the world at that time.
And his family wasn't just your average family. They were steeped in academia. His father, August von Hayek, was a medical doctor and a botanist. His grandfathers were scholars.
It seems like learning was just a family trait.
Totally.
His father was a part-time botany lecturer at the University of Vienna, and Hayek actually spent a lot of his youth helping his father with botanical work, classifying plants, studying their structures.
He was a science kid.
Oh, very much so. He was very interested in biology and evolution from a young age, reading people like Hugo de Vries and August Weismann, and that biological perspective, this idea of seeing how complex systems like plants or entire ecosystems evolve without a designer, that never really left him.
Now, here is a detail from the family tree that I found absolutely fascinating. We talk about intellectual giants, but Hayek had a literal relative who was one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century.
Ludwig Wittgenstein.
His second cousin.
Yeah, his second cousin on his mother's side.
That is just a lot of brain power in one bloodline.
It really is. Hayek's mother knew Wittgenstein well. She apparently played with his sisters when they were children. And because of this connection, Hayek was actually one of the very first people to read Wittgenstein's famous Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus when it came out in 1921.
So did they hang out? Did they debate philosophy over coffee in Vienna?
Not exactly. They met rarely. The family connection was there, but they weren't, best friends. But Hayek said Wittgenstein's philosophy and his method of analysis had a profound influence on his thinking.
How so?
Well, Wittgenstein was obsessed with the limits of language, what can be said clearly and what cannot. And Hayek kind of took that rigorous skepticism and applied it to society. What can be known by a central authority and what cannot.
That's a great connection. And they actually ran into each other during World War I, is that right?
It is, which is just a wild coincidence of history. They were both officers serving in the same army. But the real influence was intellectual, not personal.
That brings us to the event that really shattered that old world Vienna and forged Hayek's future, World War I.
He joined an artillery regiment in 1917. He fought on the Italian front. He was young, just a teenager, and it was brutal.
And he didn't come out unscathed. The sources mention he suffered permanent hearing damage in his left ear.
He did. But the psychological and intellectual impact was far, far greater than the physical injury. The war was the catalyst.
It changed everything for him.
Before the war, he was interested in the natural sciences, botany, maybe even theater. But after seeing the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, seeing the utter devastation caused by bad political decisions, he pivoted.
He wanted to know why.
Exactly. He wanted to understand the mistakes that led to the war. He felt that the problems of political organization were the most urgent thing a mind could possibly tackle.
He realized civilization is fragile.
Very fragile. So the botanist became the social scientist.
He goes to the University of Vienna, and he's studying everything, philosophy, psychology, economics. But there's this one detail in the sources that I think is so telling, and it's often overlooked: the brain lab.
Ah, yes. The Konstantin von Monachow's Institute of Brain Anatomy.
Hayek spent time there staining brain cells. He was literally looking at the physical structure of the brain under a microscope.
And this is so crucial. It wasn't a distraction. This work on how neurons connect, on how the brain organizes itself physically, it planted the seeds for a book he would write decades later called The Sensory Order.
So he was already thinking about networks.
He was. He realized that the brain isn't just a camera passively taking pictures of the world. It's a complex, self-organizing network.
Which sounds a lot like how he eventually described the economy.
Precisely. The connection between the neural network and the market network is a thread that runs through his whole life. He saw that order could emerge from the bottom up through the interaction of millions of cells or millions of people without a central commander telling each one what to do.
So back in Vienna, he's got these ideas brewing. Who were his mentors?
He fell under the mentorship of Friedrich von Wieser and, of course, the big one, Ludwig von Mises.
Now, Mises is a heavy hitter in the Austrian School of Economics. But Hayek wasn't always a free market guy, was he?
No, and that's a very common misconception. Like many young intellectuals of his time in Vienna after the war, Hayek was initially sympathetic to democratic socialism.
Really?
Oh yeah, he found Marxism too rigid and doctrinaire, but the idea of a mild socialism, a rational, organized society designed by smart people, that appealed to him.
So what changed his mind?
It was Mises' book, Socialism, which came out in 1922. Hayek read it, and it just rocked his world. It completely shifted him toward classical liberalism.
What was the argument?
Mises convinced him that socialism, even the well-intentioned democratic kind, had a fundamental, unsolvable flaw in how it handled economics. It wasn't just a moral argument, it was a technical one.
Which brings us perfectly to section 2, the big idea. This is the core aha moment of Hayek's career, the economic calculation problem.
This is it. This is the central thesis. If you take one thing away from Hayek's economics, this should be it. It is the rock upon which his entire philosophy stands.
Okay, let's unpack this, because usually when people talk about economics, they talk about money or jobs or taxes. Hayek talked about knowledge.
He did. The problem, as Hayek saw it, is that in any complex society, knowledge is dispersed. It's scattered among millions and millions of individuals.
Okay, so for example, I know what I want for lunch. The farmer knows how his crops are doing today. The truck driver knows there's a traffic jam on I-95.
Exactly. And the engineer knows the tensile strength of the steel in that truck. The shopkeeper knows that her customers are suddenly buying less of one product and more of another.
Little bits of information everywhere.
This is what Hayek called knowledge of time and place. It's local, it is fleeting, it's changing every second. And crucially, it is often tacit, meaning people know it, but they can't necessarily articulate it or put it into a statistic.
Like a craftsman.
A skilled craftsman knows how to shape the wood, but he might not be able to write a mathematical formula for it. It's in his hands, in his experience.
And the central planner, the government official sitting in a capital city trying to run the economy, doesn't have any of this knowledge.
They can't have it. It's physically impossible for one central authority to collect, update, and process all this dispersed information in real time. The economy is changing every single second.
So if you try to plan an economy from the top down, you're flying blind.
Completely blind. You're making decisions based on old, incomplete, or just plain wrong data.
So if the central planner can't know everything, how do we coordinate? How do the farmer and the trucker and the engineer and the consumer all get on the same page without bumping into each other?
Through the price system. And this is where Hayek is just brilliant. He didn't see prices as just annoying numbers on a tag. He saw prices as a telecommunication system.
A language. The sources use that analogy.
Yes, a language.
Yeah.
Prices are signals. They communicate vast amounts of information across the entire network of the economy to people who don't know each other and will never meet.
Use an example. Help us visualize this.
Okay, let's take the famous tin example that Hayek used in his paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society.
Okay.
Suppose somewhere in the world a tin mine collapses. Or maybe a new and important use for tin is discovered in electronics. For whatever reason, the supply of tin has gone down relative to demand.
Okay, tin is scarcer.
Now, does the consumer of tin, say a guy who makes tin cans in Ohio, does he need to know why? Does he need to read reports about the mine collapse in Peru or the labor strike in Chile?
No, he just sees the price of tin went up.
Exactly. The price rises. That single number contains the summary of all that dispersed information. It condenses the disaster, the scarcity, the labor issues, the new demand, all into one simple statement.
And what does he do?
Because the price is higher, the can maker in Ohio, without needing to be told by a government official, naturally starts to economize. He uses less tin, he looks for substitutes, maybe he switches to aluminum, he recycles more.
So the price signal coordinated his behavior without him even understanding the root cause.
Precisely. It turns millions of individual selfish decisions into a coordinated social outcome. It makes us act as if we knew everything, even though as individuals we know almost nothing.
And this was the heart of his debate with the socialists, right? People like Oscar Lange.
Right. In the 1920s and 30s, there was this huge debate called the socialist calculation debate. And Oscar Lange and others argued, look, we have equations now, we have general equilibrium theory, we can just model the market.
They thought they could simulate the market with math.
They did. They argued, we can solve the equations and set the prices ourselves. We'll have a central planning board that acts like a market.
And Hayek's response?
Hayek said, you're missing the entire point. You can't simulate the discovery process. The market isn't just solving a static set of equations. It's a dynamic process of constant discovery.
What do you mean by discovery?
You don't know what the true costs are until you actually try to do something. You don't know what people really want until they vote with their wallets. Central planning fails because it assumes the knowledge is already there, just waiting to be collected.
But Hayek argued the knowledge is created by the market process itself.
Exactly. It's the difference between a map and the actual territory. The planner works with the map, which is always static and simplified. The market is the territory, alive and constantly changing.
So Hayek establishes himself as this brilliant theorist of knowledge. And in 1931, he gets a call. He's invited to the big leagues.
The London School of Economics, the LSE.
This was a huge move.
Huge. Lionel Robbins, a very prominent economist at the time, invited him. Hayek arrives in London, and he is immediately recognized as a leading theorist. He's influencing students who would go on to be massive figures themselves, people like John Kenneth Galbraith and David Rockefeller.
But London was also the home turf of another economic giant, the man who would become his great intellectual rival.
John Maynard Keynes.
The clash between Hayek and Keynes is probably the most famous duel in the history of economics.
It's the Batman versus Superman of the dismal science.
It really is. And the fundamental disagreement was about what causes economic depressions, specifically the Great Depression they were living through at that very moment.
Right. They were trying to solve the same puzzle, but from completely opposite directions.
So Keynes had a pretty clear view. The economy is like a car that has stalled. There's a lack of what he called aggregate demand. People just aren't spending.
So the government needs to step on the gas.
Exactly. The government should spend money, even if it has to borrow it, print it, whatever. Just get things moving again.
Right. Demand-side economics. If people aren't buying, the government should buy. That was the Keynesian solution.
But Hayek, coming from the Austrian school, he saw it completely differently. He didn't look at the crash. He looked at the boom that came before the crash.
The party before the hangover.
That's a perfect analogy.
Hayek argued that the Depression wasn't caused by a sudden lack of demand out of nowhere. It was the inevitable and necessary consequence of the artificial boom that happened earlier. A boom fueled by easy money, by artificially low interest rates set by central banks.
So when interest rates are too low, it sends a false signal to businesses.
A false price signal. It tells them to invest in long-term projects, to build new factories, to expand. But the real savings aren't there to support it.
They confuse cheap money for real savings.
That's the malinvestment. They build factories for products nobody really wants in the long run. They hire workers for jobs that aren't sustainable. And Hayek argued that once you've built all these wrong things, you have to have a correction.
The recession.
The recession is the economy trying to heal itself. It's the process of liquidating those bad investments and moving resources workers, capital, back to where they actually belong.
So if the government steps in with a big spending package to prop everything up, Hayek would say.
He would say you are just delaying the inevitable and making the underlying problem worse. You are keeping the zombie companies alive. You are preventing the necessary restructuring.
You are trying to cure the hangover by drinking more vodka.
Precisely.
Keynes did not like this theory.
To put it mildly, we have a famous and very brutal quote from Keynes in a review of Hayek's book, Prices and Production. He called it one of the most frightful muddles I have ever read.
Ouch. That's not just academic disagreement. That's personal.
And he didn't stop there. He added, "It is an extraordinary example of how, starting with a mistake, a remorseless logician can end in bedlam."
Bedlam. As in the famous insane asylum. He basically called Hayek's logic crazy.
He did. And sadly for Hayek, in the battle for hearts and minds during the Great Depression, Keynes won, hands down.
Well, it makes sense from a political standpoint, doesn't it? If you are a politician and one economist says, do nothing, let the system purge itself, it will be painful but necessary.
And the other guy says, here, spend this money. Hire these people, you can save the day.
You're going to listen to the second guy every single time.
Politics favors action. Keynes gave politicians a toolkit to do something. Hayek told them their toolkit was the source of the problem.
Plus, Hayek's own work was just difficult.
It was incredibly dense. His work on capital theory is notoriously hard to get through. Even Milton Friedman, who agreed with Hayek politically, later called Hayek's book The Pure Theory of Capital unreadable.
When Milton Friedman calls your economics book unreadable, you know you have a marketing problem.
You really do. So by the late 1930s, Keynesianism just sweeps the field. The general theory becomes the new Bible of economics. Hayek is increasingly seen as a relic, a dinosaur.
He tried to fight back, right? There was a letter to the Times.
He did. In 1932, he and Lionel Robbins and others wrote to the paper, arguing that private investment was the path to wealth. Not government spending, but the intellectual tide was just completely against them.
But Hayek doesn't just fade away, he pivots. And this pivot gives us one of the most influential and controversial books of the 20th century, Section 4, The Road to Serfdom.
This was a massive shift for him. During World War II, Hayek moves away from technical economics, equilibrium curves and capital structure, and he moves into political philosophy.
Why the change? What prompted it?
He was living in Britain during the war. And he saw the intellectual climate shifting around him. He saw that even in democratic Britain, there was this growing admiration for planning, for state control.
Because the war effort required it.
Exactly. The war required a centrally planned economy, and a lot of intellectuals thought, hey, this works. Why don't we just keep doing this in peacetime to solve poverty and unemployment?
And he also saw a dangerous misunderstanding about the enemy they were fighting.
Yes. He saw that many of his colleagues in British academia believed that fascism and Nazism were a reaction against socialism, that they were some kind of hyper-capitalist evil. Hayek said, no, you've got that completely backwards.
He argued they were the same beast, cut from the same cloth.
They were branches of the same tree. That was his thesis in The Road to Serfdom, published in 1944. He argued that fascism, Nazism, and communism are all children of collectivism and central planning.
And the core of the argument is the slippery slope, right?
It is. He argued that if you start with central economic planning, even for very good reasons, like we want to ensure everyone has shoes, you inevitably have to give the planners more and more power.
Why inevitably?
Because what if people don't want the shoes you planned? What if some people want boots instead? What if the shoe factory workers want to go on strike? The plan requires you to control all of that. To make the plan work, you have to control people.
So economic control leads directly to political control.
That's the core message. You cannot separate economic freedom from political freedom. If the government controls your livelihood, it controls you. And it destroys the rule of law, because the planner has to make arbitrary decisions to make the plan fit reality.
If the plan says we need more coal, the planner has to be able to force people into the mines.
Precisely. Liberty is sacrificed on the altar of the plan.
Now, the reception of this book is a story in itself. In Britain, it was popular, but
There was paper rationing. It was wartime. They literally couldn't print enough copies to meet the demand. He called it that unobtainable book.
in America,
In America, it absolutely exploded. University of Chicago Press published it. But the real kicker was Reader's Digest. In April of 1945, they published a condensed version.
and Reader's Digest back then wasn't just some magazine in a doctor's waiting room. It was massive.
It reached millions and millions of households. Suddenly, this dense Austrian professor became a household name in America. He went on a lecture tour. He became a celebrity. He was addressing crowds of thousands who were terrified that the New Deal was going to turn into American Nazism.
And ironically, even his old rival Keynes wrote him a letter about it.
He did. And you'd think Keynes would absolutely hate it. But he wrote a letter saying, and I'm quoting here, "In my opinion, it is a grand book. Morally and philosophically, I find myself in agreement with virtually the whole of it."
Wait, really? After calling his other book Bedlam?
Yes. Keynes disagreed with the economics. He didn't believe that any step toward planning was an inevitable slide into tyranny. But he deeply respected the moral defense of liberal values.
So what was the disagreement then?
I think Keynes essentially thought, well, I can manage the economy without becoming a dictator because I'm a good, civilized liberal. Whereas Hayek's point was that the system of planning makes the dictatorship inevitable, regardless of how good the intentions of the people in charge are.
That's a fascinating distinction. So Hayek is famous now, but he's also kind of an outcast in the economics profession because of the Keynesian takeover. So he moves. Section 5, the Chicago years.
In 1950, he leaves London and goes to the University of Chicago. But, and this is a big but, he doesn't join the economics department.
The home of the famous Chicago School of Economics, the home of free market thought, and their biggest intellectual star doesn't join the department.
They wouldn't have him. Or rather, the economics department at that time was becoming very mathematical, very positivist. They viewed Hayek's style as old-fashioned, too philosophical, too literary, not enough equations.
So where'd he go?
He joined something called the Committee on Social Thought. And to add a little insult to injury, his salary wasn't even paid by the university. No, it was paid by an outside foundation, the William Volcker Fund. He was definitely doing his own thing, sort of on the periphery.
But he was there at the same time as Milton Friedman. They must have been best buds, plotting the neoliberal takeover of the world from some smoke-filled room.
You would think so, but the sources paint a very different picture. They were colleagues, they were friendly, but they're not close collaborators. They worked in different buildings.
And they had different approaches.
Very different. Friedman admired Hayek's political work. The Road to Serfdom was hugely important to him, but, as we mentioned, he thought Hayek's technical economics was flawed, or at least unreadable. Friedman was a positivist. He wanted to test theories with data. Hayek was more of a philosopher. He thought the most important things in economics couldn't be measured like physics.
While he's in Chicago, Hayek goes back to his first love, the brain.
He does. In 1952, he publishes The Sensory Order. And this is the book that grew out of those days staining brain cells back in Vienna 30 years earlier.
And this book is surprisingly, almost shockingly, ahead of its time.
It is incredible. He developed a model of Hebbian learning, the idea that neurons that fire together, wire together, before the psychologist Donald Hebb formally popularized it.
And how does this connect to his economics? Because on the surface, it seems like a total detour.
It's not a detour at all. It's the foundation. It's the micro-level version of his macro-level theory. He argued that the mind is a self-ordering system. We don't just passively receive sense data, like a camera.
The mind isn't a bucket we pour facts into.
No. The mind actively constructs our version of the world based on the network of connections it has built up over time through experience. The mind imposes its own order on the chaos of sensory input.
So the mind is a spontaneous order, just like the market.
Exactly. You can't plan a mind from the outside. It has to grow and organize itself through interaction with the world. This reinforced his belief that complex systems, whether they're brains or economies, cannot be engineered from the top down. It provided the psychological and biological backing for his political philosophy.
He also wrote the Constitution of Liberty in 1960. This was his big attempt to lay out the positive principles of a free society.
It was his magnum opus, in a way.
But it didn't land with the same splash as Road to Serfdom.
No, it didn't. It was a heavier, more detailed, more academic book. And by the 1960s, the world had moved on. The post-war boom was in full swing. Keynesianism seemed to be working perfectly. Governments were managing the economy, and everyone was getting richer.
And Hayek just seemed like a grumpy old man warning about a fire that never happened.
That's a good way to put it. He seemed increasingly irrelevant.
Which leads us to Section 6, the wilderness, depression, and resurgence.
The late 60s and early 70s were the absolute low point for him. His health declined. He suffered from severe depression. He had gone deaf in one ear during the war, and his hearing in the other ear was failing.
And intellectually, he felt ignored.
Completely. He felt his life's work had been in vain. He was watching the world enthusiastically embrace all the ideas he hated, and nobody seemed to care about his warnings anymore.
That is just heartbreaking. To be that brilliant and to feel like the world has just passed you by.
It's a tragic story. But then the turning point. 1974. The phone rings. It's the Nobel Committee.
It wasn't just an award, it was a resurrection.
His biographer, Alan Ebenstein, calls it the great rejuvenating event in his life. Almost immediately, his health improved. He became active again. He started writing again.
And the timing was just perfect because of what was happening in the 1970s.
The 1970s economy was starting to crash. We got stagflation, high inflation, and high unemployment at the same time.
Which, according to the standard Keynesian theory of the time, shouldn't happen.
Exactly. Keynesianism couldn't explain it. The models were breaking. But Hayek could. His theories about money and inflation and malinvestment suddenly looked very, very relevant again. He argued that the inflation was the predictable result of all that easy money and government spending they've been doing for decades.
And the politicians started listening. We have to talk about Margaret Thatcher.
The famous anecdote. It's a great story.
It's 1975. Thatcher is the new leader of the Conservative Party in Britain. She's at a policy meeting. A speaker is droning on about finding a middle way, being pragmatic, avoiding extremes.
Basically advocating for the status quo. And Thatcher was not having it.
No. She reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a copy of Hayek's The Constitution of Liberty. She slammed it on the table, and she declared, "This is what we believe."
Bam. A declaration of war on the old consensus.
It's such a cinematic moment.
And it wasn't just Thatcher. In the U.S., Ronald Reagan listed Hayek as one of his top intellectual influences. He welcomed Hayek to the White House.
And perhaps even more powerfully, his ideas were spreading behind the Iron Curtain.
This is maybe the most moving part of his legacy. Dissidents in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, were reading Hayek in secret underground editions. It was called samizdat.
So they were risking prison to read this stuff.
They were. Václav Klaus, who later became the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, famously said that they were all reading Hayek while the Western academics were still reading Marx. They saw in Hayek a clear explanation for why their own centrally planned economies were such miserable failures.
So he goes from the wilderness to being the intellectual godfather of the Reagan-Thatcher revolution. But we have to be honest. It wasn't all victory laps. There were some serious controversies. Section 7. Controversies and complex views.
Hayek was a very complex man, and he held some views that frankly, don't fit neatly into the modern libertarian hero box, and some that are deeply problematic by today's standards.
Okay, let's start with immigration and nationalism.
Hayek was anti-nationalist in principle. He hated the my country right or wrong attitude that led to World War I. But, and this is a big but, he supported Margaret Thatcher's anti-immigration policies.
Why? That seems contradictory for a guy who loves the free movement of goods and capital.
His reasoning was all about tradition and the stability of institutions. He feared that if you had too much immigration too quickly from cultures that were too different, it would trigger a tribal nationalist backlash among the native population.
So he thought that backlash would end up destroying the very liberal institutions he loved.
That was his argument. He wanted to close the borders to save liberalism from itself, in a way. But we have to note, the sources mention he made some pretty offensive remarks about specific ethnic groups, Middle Eastern populations, Indian students. He claimed it wasn't racial feeling, but cultural. But reading them today, they are definitely ugly.
Then there's the big one, the dictatorships question, specifically Chile and Augusto Pinochet.
This is the big stain on his reputation for many of his critics. Hayek visited Chile twice while it was under the military dictatorship of General Pinochet.
Pinochet, who overthrew a democratically elected socialist government and was responsible for the torture and disappearance of thousands of people.
Right. And while he was there, Hayek said something in an interview that has haunted his legacy ever since. He said, "Personally, I prefer a liberal dictatorship to democratic government devoid of liberalism."
Whoa, unpack that for us. That sounds terrible.
It does sound terrible.
Yeah.
And he got a lot of heat for it. His argument, and he was trying to be very precise here, was a distinction between authoritarianism and totalitarianism.
What's the difference in his view?
A totalitarian government, like the Nazis or the Soviets, tries to control everything. Your mind, your job, your family, your art. There's no private sphere. An authoritarian dictator, in his view, might restrict voting and political freedoms for a while, but if they enforce the rule of law and protect free markets and private property, they might be a transitional vehicle to get back to a truly free society.
So he saw Pinochet as a necessary evil to stop Chile from becoming a totalitarian socialist state like Cuba.
Yes. He believed a dictatorship could theoretically be liberal in the economic and legal sense, serving as a temporary bridge back to democracy. The backlash, as you can imagine, was massive. He was accused of supporting fascism, which is deeply ironic given he wrote The Road to Serfdom.
But he really believed that democracy was a means to an end, and that end was liberty.
Exactly. If democracy voted to destroy liberty, he chose liberty over the democratic process. It's a view that is very, very uncomfortable for most people.
Okay, then there is his view on social justice.
He absolutely hated the term. He called it an empty phrase, a mirage.
Why? What was his objection?
Because he believed the word justice is about individual conduct. Did you steal from someone? Did you break a contract? That is a just or an unjust act. But society, for Hayek, is just a spontaneous outcome of millions of individual interactions. It's not a person. It can't have intentions.
So arguing that the distribution of wealth in society is unjust is like arguing that the weather is unjust.
That's a perfect way to put it. A stone falling isn't just or unjust. It just happens. And he argued that if you try to make the outcome just, which usually means more equal, you have to treat people unequally. You have to take from person A to give to person B.
And that destroys the rule of law, which says the rule should be the same for everyone.
Exactly. It requires the state to treat people differently based on who they are, not on what they do.
But, and here's the twist that surprises almost everyone, Hayek was not opposed to a social safety net.
This is the most surprising nuance, and it gets lost in the modern political debate. People think of him as this hardline, sink-or-swim libertarian. But in The Road to Serfdom, he explicitly writes, and I'll quote a piece of it, "There is no reason why security against severe physical privation should not be guaranteed to all."
He supported a basic minimum income or something like it?
He did. He supported state-assisted insurance for the common hazards of life sickness, accidents, old age. He didn't want the state manipulating prices or controlling production, but he was perfectly fine with the state providing a floor below which nobody should be allowed to fall.
He wasn't an anarchist.
Not at all. He believed the state had a legitimate, though limited, role. That's a huge distinction that gets lost in the memes.
Okay, let's wrap up with Section 8, spontaneous order and his final legacy.
We've touched on spontaneous order throughout, but we need to define it clearly. It is the central unifying concept of all his work. It is the idea that order can emerge from human action without human design.
The result of human action, but not of human design. I love that phrase. It's so elegant.
It is. Think of language. No committee sat down and wrote the English language from scratch. It evolved organically through millions of people just trying to communicate with each other over centuries. It has complex rules, it has structure, but nobody designed it.
And the common law? The legal tradition?
Same thing. Judges making rulings on specific cases over hundreds of years created a vast, coherent body of law that makes sense, without a single legislator writing a master code from top to bottom.
And the market.
The ultimate spontaneous order, and ecosystems in nature. Hayek's point was that these systems are infinitely more complex and intelligent than any individual mind within them. And if you try to fix them with a crude tool like central planning, you will almost certainly make things worse because of your own ignorance.
So where do we see his ideas having relevance today? The outline mentions the 2008 financial crisis.
Right. When the housing market crashed, interest in Hayek surged again. A lot of people went back to his Austrian business cycle theory. They said, look, the Fed kept interest rates too low for too long after the dot-com crash. They created an artificial, unsustainable boom in housing.
So it wasn't a failure of capitalism, but a failure of the central bank distorting the price signals.
That was the argument. It fit his theory almost perfectly.
And what about cryptocurrency? Bitcoin.
Modern libertarians view Bitcoin as a profoundly Hayekian project. Late in his life, Hayek wrote a book called The Denationalization of Money. He argued that government shouldn't have a monopoly on issuing currency. We should have competition in currencies, just like we have competition in cards or phones.
And Bitcoin is basically that, a currency not issued by any state, competing in the marketplace of ideas.
Exactly. It's an attempt to create a spontaneous monetary order and escape from the central planner of the Federal Reserve. Whether Hayek would have approved of the wild volatility of Bitcoin is another question, but the principle is very close to his later ideas.
And we can't forget the pop culture moment. The rap battle.
Fear the boom and bust. The Mercatus Center at George Mason University produced these incredible music videos. You have two actors playing Keynes and Hayek, rapping their economic theories.
It sounds completely ridiculous, but they are actually incredibly educational and very well done.
They are. I want to steer markets. I want them set free. It brought these century-old debates to a whole new generation on YouTube. It just shows that these ideas are still very much alive and still fighting each other.
So as we wrap up, let's try and synthesize all this.
Yeah.
What is the single biggest takeaway from the life and work of Friedrich Hayek?
I think the core message, the thread that ties everything together, is intellectual humility. Hayek wasn't just an economist. He was, as we said at the start, a philosopher of human ignorance.
His whole project was an argument against arrogance.
It was. He basically said, the world is infinitely more complex than your brain can ever understand. Therefore, we should build our institutions, like the market, like the rule of law, to work with that ignorance, rather than pretending we can engineer society like a machine.
We are not gods. We are just nodes in a network we can't fully comprehend.
Exactly. A humble and, I think, profound insight.
But here's a provocative thought to leave you with. Hayek's whole argument rested on the idea that no central planner could ever have enough data to replace the price mechanism, the knowledge problem.
Right, the impossibility of the calculation.
But today, we have big data, we have AI, we have algorithms that know what you want to buy before you even know you want to buy it. Amazon and Google have more data on us than the KGB ever dreamed of.
That is the big, scary question, isn't it?
In an era of coming artificial general intelligence, does Hayek's knowledge problem still hold true? Or are we finally building the central planner he thought was impossible? Are we building a digital god that actually can know it all?
It's a terrifying and fascinating possibility. If the computation cost of all that data goes to zero, does the calculation problem disappear? Or is there something fundamentally unpredictable about human choice and discovery that can never be captured in data, no matter how big?
Something to mull over. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the mind of Friedrich Hayek.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.